Once the Duke had taken over Romagna, he found it had been commanded by impotent lords who had been readier to despoil their subjects than to correct them, and had given their subjects matter for disunion, not for union. Since that province was quite full of robberies, quarrels, and every other kind of insolence, he judged it necessary to give it good government, if he wanted to reduce it to peace and obedience to a kingly arm. So he put there Messer Ramiro de Orco, a cruel and ready man, to whom he gave the fullest power. In a short time, Ramiro reduced it to peace and unity, with the very greatest reputation for himself. Then the Duke judged that such excessive authority was not necessary, because he feared that it might become hateful, and he set up a civil court in the middle of the province, with a most excellent president, where each city had its advocate. And because he knew that past rigors had generated some hatred for Ramiro, to purge the spirits of that people, and to gain them entirely to himself, he wished to show that if any cruelty had been committed, this had not come from him, but from the harsh nature of his minister. And having seized this opportunity, he had him placed one morning in the piazza at Cesena in 2 pieces, with a piece of wood and a bloody knife beside him. The ferocity of this spectacle left the people at once satisfied and stupefied. Now, I highlight this quotation from Machiavelli because, to my mind, it sheds a different light on his conception, his use of violence. Now, it is very well known that for Machiavelli, violence is a constituent part of politics. He doesn't have a neat distinction that other theorists that came after him might want to posit between violence and the sphere of violence and the sphere of politics, or to find something, and in the previous example I had in mind, say, a Hobbes that tries to create a space of politics purged of violence from a very violent sort of state of nature, or a Hannah Arendt who wants to say that violence has something anti-political about it. Machiavelli has no illusions or is not sort of engaged in trying to purge politics of its violent foundation. Rather, he's very explicit about those foundations. And again and again, he remarks how violence is necessary, even though never sufficient, for the founding of a new state and for its perpetuation. And if at times his remarks are concentrated on how to conquer new territory and how to overcome the enemy, at other times, he's focused on how to construct an army from citizens, how to recruit them, how to organize them, how to distribute them on the battlefield, how to motivate them to fight, etc. But in this passage, we see a different kind of violence. So first, there is the violence that is utilized by this Ramiro in order to bring order into the city that has been conquered, because the previous lords of the territory of Romagna have not governed well. So there's a lot of crime, there's a lot of dissension, there's a lot of sort of popular violence that is taking place. So the initial use of violence here, after the conquest, of course, is the very strict and harsh regiment of reducing the population into some kind of orderly state, and to ensure their submission to the Duke. Now, the important part, of course, is that and this shows, in Machiavelli's opinion, the Duke's political acumen, is that there is a tipping point when the violence that is useful in bringing order turns into its opposite and begins to alienate people and begins to incur their hatred. At this point, the Duke, as Machiavelli narrates, understands that it's time to move from the moment of foundation to the moment of a more popular regime that involves not just the violent subjugation of the people and the elimination of their resistance, but an order that will involve them and at least get their support. So he sets up a spectacle in which the person who was his right hand until that time in reducing the state, the new territory, into submission, is tried in the center of the city, is judged, and this becomes an outlet for the people to pronounce their accumulated resentments and grievances in public. And he says, to purge the spirits of that people and to gain them entirely to himself, he wished to show that if any cruelty had been committed, this had not come from him, but from the harsh nature of his minister. So what happens is that by actually putting his previous right hand onto the stand, allowing the people to judge and indict him and to sort of spill out all of the resentments that they had accumulated until now in public, he is able to very strategically maneuver himself, distance himself, and of course he then puts the same Remiro's body, cut into half, as a spectacle to the piazza, at the center of the piazza. And Machiavelli says, and this is very important, that the ferocity of the spectacle left the people at once satisfied and stupefied. So violence is not just necessary for conquest, it's not simply necessary in order to impose new modes and orders, but at times it is also necessary to quell violence, by a spectacular form of violence, in order to stop the violence, in order to indicate that the moment from the violent foundation to the more orderly, perhaps republican, perhaps more participatory moment of government has come. So the passage from the founding moment to the moment of reproducing what has already been achieved has come. And sometimes, and in this example, it is through the cutting off of the former right hand of the Duke. A ferocious spectacle is helpful in order to indicate the rupture that is now being enacted in the transition of the regime. Now, this spectacle is important because it leaves the people satisfied, so it becomes an outlet of their vengeance, but at the same time, it leaves the people stupefied. So it has certain effects on the people that is dulling of their senses, if you will, or inculcating a kind of fear and complacency that is not necessarily perpetuated by further acts of violence, but simply by the spectacle that shows who has the real power, who has the real authority, and that how that authority, once has been established, needs the satisfaction and stupefied complacence of the people in order to function. So this, of course, very obviously confirms to Machiavelli's intuition that violence is simply a continuation of politics, and the more spectacular forms of violence are not immune to this logic, as well as being the precondition for the political foundations. But more importantly here, we get a conception of politics as a stage of appearances where the prince, the ruler, is also very involved with controlling the effects of how he appears before the people. So even though he is the source of the original violence committed through his right hand, Remiro, he is very careful to calibrate the amount of that violence in order to calculate the effect of that so that the people do not pass into opposition to his new rule that has been established, but rather give him the kind of consensual support that he needs in order to perpetuate his rule.